Welcome back, everyone. This is episode 3 of the Computing Basics 101 tutorial utilizing Fedora Linux and more specifically the Gnome desktop. In the last episode, if you recall, we went through and learned about the basics of using this desktop environment that we're looking at. We learned how window management works, workspaces, opening and closing, modifying and manipulating windows within the desktop environment, along with a couple shortcuts and a couple just things you kind of need to know to use the system day to day. Now, today we're going to get into a couple of the applications. We're mostly going to look at Firefox, and towards the end, if there's time, we're going to look at the settings window. If there isn't time, then I'm just going to cut it off, and I'll do the settings window in an entire separate episode of its own because of how in-depth the settings can be in this. So what we're going to look at first is Firefox. The justification for this and my reasoning for it is for a large percentage of people, a huge percentage of people are going to only use Firefox. Realistically, almost everything we do today on computers is done through a browser in some way, like whether it's content consumption, online shopping. If you're a student in school, all your school stuff is going to be handled on the browser. A lot of applications that can be installed, things like, again, content consumption, so things like Spotify, communication applications like Facebook Messenger, Instagram. I believe even Google Messages now has a browser-based application that can connect directly to your device. So everything can be done, and usually is done through the browser, even if there may be an alternative application. I believe that the browser is one of the most important factors of a general computing system. We're going to look through the browser today and get that kind of set up. If you recall, last time I opened this, this was kind of busy. There's a lot going on because it opens up the Fedora start page, which might be okay for some people, but I figure most people are not going to care about half the stuff on here. As you can tell, it's mostly some documentation justifications, but most of these lists up here. So if you look, we're on Fedora Workstation, right? They have all of their various versions of Fedora listed here, which is fine, but most people aren't going to need things like Fedora Server, Cloud, IoT. This is for developers more than rather than general Fedora users, rather than general computing users. It shows some of their news, it shows some of their videos and stuff. It's more just a Fedora community page that most people aren't going to care about unless you're a developer and unless you're wholeheartedly involved in Fedora for Fedora, not for Linux. I view a different perspective there. But as you notice, every time we open this page, it comes to this. We have all this bar up here. These are bookmarks. We'll look into that a little later. There's a lot going on up at this top navigation bar. Basically, everything that you're going to be wanting to do in the browser, anything you're going to want to configure, change, set up, is going to be found up here in this application menu in the top right. This is going to be considered and called a hamburger menu by a lot of documentation, by a lot of experts, and by a lot of developers, a lot of users alike. You can say, go look in the hamburger menu for something. This might look familiar to apps on your phone. You'll see hamburger menus used a lot there as well. Don't ask me, I didn't name it that. If we open this menu with a left click, we can see a whole bunch of different widgets and settings that we can look into. We can create new tabs, new windows, manage our bookmarks and history, downloads, passwords, add-ons, which we'll get into probably towards the end of this a bit more. Print the current page we're on. We can save the page. Usually that will save as an HTML file, which most people probably won't be able to properly use. I can probably get into that in a more advanced episode of file types and file usage and things. Find in page, so that's like finding specific text within a page. Translating page for those of you who might be using a page that isn't in your native language. Maybe you're from a different country, maybe English isn't your first language and you need to utilize an English page, which most pages nowadays are in fact made English focused because that is one of the largest markets. So if you need to translate a shopping page or something that doesn't have support for your native language, that's where you're going to want to go for this. Page zoom, settings, which is what we're actually going to dive into first, and some other stuff down here, which is more specific to troubleshooting or developer kind of tools. We can take a look into those as well. We're going to go into settings first because I don't like the way that this is laid out right now. Just left click on that, it'll open a new tab. So if you're not familiar with how browsers work, these use tabs for everything, so you can multitask without having multiple windows open at a time. This allows you to basically view one thing at a time per tab. And if you need another window, that's possible. We can get into that in a second. I probably should have gotten into that in the last episode because it was more window management based stuff. But for the most part, I'll just kind of go brush over it really quick in this episode. But for now, we're just going to look at the settings menu, which again opens in a new tab. Everything you're going to do is going to happen in a tab in this browser. And you can go back to the first one, just left click on the tab. And again, when you hover over it, you'll see that little dark box show up around whatever to indicate that is an interactable button. We can interact with our tabs here. We can actually drag it as well and move it over to the front. Just left click and hold as if you're moving a window. We're just going to go through some of these settings here, and we're just going to look over what some of these do and what some good ones might be to select. A lot of these are probably going to be, if it's set for me or unset for me, it's probably going to be the same for you. So if it's identical, then don't bother with it. If it isn't, then I would suggest maybe changing it. I'm just going to go with some of these. If you want, when you close your Firefox window, maybe if you're commuting between work and home, if you want it to reopen into what it was previously, any tabs you might have had open, you can check this box. I'm going to leave it unchecked because personally I prefer when I close my system and close my sessions that it remains that way and I can have a fresh start. But if you want it to always remember what you had up, then you can check that. That's up to you. We're going to ignore most of this here. All of these, I would suggest for some beginners maybe to check this box here that says confirm before closing multiple tabs. This will prevent you from accidentally closing the entire window. If you have more than one tab open, it will pop up a separate dialog that will ask if you actually want to close that, and it'll prevent if you're trying to close one tab, or if you accidentally click this X up here, or something happens that tries to trigger the window closing, it won't just wipe everything that you've had. So if you're kind of a beginner and you're welcome to check that on. I'm going to leave it off for this case. We're going to leave website appearance alone, other than because what it's set to right now is automatic. And when I went over this dark mode up here in the top right, when this toggles back and forth, as we can see here, it will change the overall color of the browser itself. You can manually toggle this so it won't change, but I'm just going to leave it on automatic for people who would prefer to use that switching. If you want dark mode all the time, we'll get into settings in either the end of this episode or next. Probably at this point, it'll probably be next, where we can toggle dark mode all the time. And again, you won't have to touch this then. It'll just use whatever the system's set to. I would recommend that. We're going to ignore colors for now and fonts. If you have accessibility issues, mostly with sight, if you're vision impaired and you want to, and you're having issues reading things, then you can turn on this zoom option, which will change the default zoom for the page that you're on. You can increase it by making this percentage a little larger, or you can decrease it if you want slightly higher productivity by being able to see more on the screen at once. Then you can actually lower this percentage and it'll make the page and text a little smaller. And then if it's more just a text thing and you don't want it to affect images, which I might actually recommend, when you turn up this default zoom, you're going to want to select this zoom text only. And that won't affect things like ads and images, buttons, things like that. It will only make text itself larger, which will kind of help with the experience a little more. We're going to ignore language for now because most people watching this are obviously going to be English, especially if you're understanding me. Files, we're just going to ignore. What this is going to enable basically is you can change the spot when you hit download on any file, which we'll get into when we do installing applications and file management. This is basically where it'll save to. Right now it's set up to your downloads folder, which we'll show later. But you can, if you prefer, either change this or select always ask to save. Every time you hit download, it will ask where you want that to go. So if you're downloading photos, you can tell it specifically to go to the photos folder. If you're downloading game files, you can tell it where to go as well. In this case, it'll just all get dumped into the same folder and you go find it yourself then. I would prefer that, but that's up to you. Applications we're going to ignore. That's advanced stuff we don't need. If you do content consumption, things like music listening, if you watch a lot of Netflix or something, you're going to want to turn on this play DRM controlled content. If you recall from the first episode when we did installation, the third-party repositories option was turned off by default. And I said that was due to open source license agreements and things between Linux community and whatnot. This is a similar argument here where some people who are more, who have other personal decisions against proprietary software and systems, they would prefer to leave DRM off, but then it causes issues when trying to watch DRM controlled content like Netflix. So you're going to want to turn that on if you are doing content consumption, if you're watching movies and TV shows. We're going to leave most of this all alone here. Again, if you are visually impaired, or even if you're colorblind or something, or you have a more severe form of colorblindness, sometimes this can be nice. It's always underlined links. And this will make if you actually look down here in the bottom left, you couldn't tell before, these were just buttons, but technically they're considered links, not actually a physical. In development, there's a little bit of a difference between a button and a link. But for the most part, if you click this, you'll see every link now technically will actually have an underline. So it makes it a little easier to read as opposed to not having that. So that's, again, up to you. If you have vision issues, you're welcome to select that. At this point, I believe that is all for the settings. We're going to go down to the next section, which is home. This is getting into this changing what our home page is, which is realistically what we came here for. This is what opens this page effectively, this Fedora start that we were looking at earlier. I would prefer to change this because it can get kind of distracting. What I'm going to do is, does it have any recommendations here? It has Firefox Home. How about we just use Firefox Home for right now? No, okay, yeah, I will, and then I'll demonstrate what this does. So it's also the same for new tabs, so I can show what this looks like. I'm going to close Fedora Start for now, just because we're not going to need it, we're not going to use it anymore. When I open a new tab, this is what we're seeing here with Firefox Home. It shows some news, even if it's not actually relevant to what I do or any of my search anything, and it shows some very commonly searched web pages. In theory by me, this is giving a generic one because, again, I just installed the system, but as you use the system, more websites you use will show up here. So again, if you use a school site a lot, if you go to Netflix a lot or YouTube or something, it'll kind of organize these. But the issue I have with this is it's got sponsored messages. So companies like Amazon have paid to put their link here so you can click on it, and that will always be there. So some people prefer to stay away from that. Some people just do the blank page, which doesn't have the search bar here, so you can search. Oh, this also uses Google by default. We're going to go through and probably change that as well, or at least show you how to change it, and then you can pick whichever search engine you want. I might provide a short video on various search engines, their pros and cons. What we're going to do, I think, is I'm going to show you how to set a custom URL for the home page, so whenever you open a new page. The easiest way to do this for people who aren't used to how URLs work is to find a page that you're going to use. So I'm going to use DuckDuckGo. So I'm just going to go up here, open a new tab, and I'm going to go duckduckgo.com, and it's going to open this page here. And then, can I do this? Use current page. Yes. Okay, perfect. That does work as intended. So that has now used DuckDuckGo as this page. So now, if I was to, you also use a bookmark automatically, which is nice. Now, if I was to close this and reopen it, I would see this DuckDuckGo page. Let's test that. Let's close Firefox again. We have nothing open. Go back down here to my dashboard, open Firefox, and we see DuckDuckGo as the primary search engine. Perfect. So that has set up our startup page. So now we don't have to worry about starting up to that really busy page anymore. New tabs is still set up to Firefox Home. You're welcome to turn that on to blank page, but it could cause issues with people who aren't fully used to search engines yet. The only other thing would be to use this home button here. So if the home button will go to this, whatever we set here. So again, you don't have to set a search engine. You can set whatever you want. You could set a school page if you use that a lot. If you realistically only use like Google Suite apps, you could set it up to your Google account or something. This can actually be any link that you can use or think of, which is why there's a use bookmark button here. What you want that to be is up to you. That's nothing I can really recommend. Most people's probably going to want to set it up for a search engine that you're going to search the internet with. Set it to whatever your heart desires. When we go to this Firefox Home, we can actually turn on and off certain things, which I would heavily recommend, because if you recall, this new tab had all this junk on it, all these stories and news, which is usually sponsored, so it's usually paid for by companies, but a lot of people will want to turn them off, so I'm going to provide you the option to do so. If you are using this new tab, you're going to want to leave this search bar more than likely, because that's how you're going to want to search things. You can search using this upper URL bar, which we'll get into, but for most people, it's just going to want to use this center bar when it opens. So we're going to leave web search on. Shortcuts, again, you can turn on or off. You can turn off sponsored shortcuts. So maybe you don't want sponsored shortcuts and you can turn that on. So it will actually kind of adapt and learn to what you use, what you do on a daily basis, and it will give recommendations based on activity. If you visit a page once or twice, it probably won't show up there, but if you visit it every day or every week, it'll probably it'll begin to appear in that list. So you can provide how many rows here you want to show at a time, so up to 4, and this is shown in 8 links here without these sponsored. So you can set up how many rows you want here. It's probably not going to properly indicate because I don't have, oh, there we go. Now we can see the blanks here are set up, which looks like you can actually set manual ones. So we'll do that when we look at this homepage more specifically. And then we can turn on and off recommended stories. So we can get rid of that news that's kind of there and kind of annoying. We can also adjust recent activity, which is kind of similar to this shortcuts thing, but this is a little more specific. This can go into using downloads, any pages you might have saved, using Pocket, which we'll kind of touch on. I don't personally use it, but I'll touch on it because some people might want to use it. Bookmarks, things like that. I usually leave this off. All I would prefer personally would just have search and maybe frequently used sites. But again, you can play around with some of these settings. It's not going to break anything. Go ahead and experiment. Going down here to search, if we just again click on this menu, we can select what our search engine is going to be. A simple drop down will select some of these by default. I don't know why some of these honestly are search engines in here, because in my opinion, Wikipedia, eBay, and Amazon aren't so much search engines. They're more just platforms for very specific things. So in some cases shopping, in some cases small research, but like you're not going to find website information on Wikipedia per se. You know, you're not going to be able to find a large amount of things. So we're probably going to be wanting to use Google, Bing, DuckDuckGo, or a custom one. I'm going to personally set it to DuckDuckGo. I recommend some people maybe try to use it, but if you're not familiar with, if you're more familiar with Google and using Google, signing into with a Google account, you're perfectly fine and valid to leave it on Google. When we're looking at this search suggestions here, so this search suggestions comes up from this search bar, which we'll look at in a second here. These can get annoying for certain people. You sometimes hear people arguing about systems always trying to guess what you're doing. This is actually turning that on or off. So you can turn off, like here, so we have sponsored search engines. We probably don't want that. We probably don't really want suggestions per se. We're going to want to turn off, for most people, you're going to want to turn off things like open tabs, because you can already see tabs here, maybe shortcuts and search engines. But again, this is going to be heavily tailored to what you want to use. I would suggest probably just play around with it. Personally, I don't use any of this, but also I usually know exactly what I'm looking for. And some people are kind of doing a bit more of a search bit by bit of what they're trying to find. And then you can just turn off these search suggestions entirely all at once. And what this is going to do is if we go over here to this new tab and we look in this URL bar, we can search with DuckDuckGo or enter address. It looks like we can do the same thing down here. So by enter address, it means something more specific, such as duckduckgo.com or google.com. But if you want to search with DuckDuckGo, you can just search really for anything. We're just going to search for Fedora Linux, right? And if I just hit enter on that, which is, and I'll show in a second, this is a simple Google search, DuckDuckGo search, whatever search engine we've selected. This is using DuckDuckGo because that's what I selected. But if I go back over here to the search engine and change over to Google, go back to this tab, and I don't even have to be on a new tab. I can just click on this URL bar at the top. Even if there's something already there, it'll do a select all. You have to make sure that this is all blue. If you click it too many times, it'll open this little cursor for typing, and you'll end up just typing in the middle of the text as opposed to searching for what you actually wanted to look for. So if you see what I'm doing here, I'm typing in the middle of it, that's not going to end up working. You need to click away and click just on the gray bar and wait for it to be full blue. If it isn't, just click away and try again. That's the easiest way without learning shortcuts and things. And you can just search again for whatever you want. Maybe I want to find YouTube. And then I can just find this, and now it's using Google. I have my sign-in options, I have safe search, I have all that stuff, Google Images, Google Shopping, etc. So again, you can pick and choose your search engine. There's ways to add more if you want to try a more experimental one. We're going to go through some search engines in a later episode. Probably not so much of this, what I'm calling the basic, like Computing Basics 101, but more just like a generic overview of different open source applications and search engines, etc. And it's just going to be little rapid fire episodes of different additions. So we're going to probably go over some more of those. I'm going to use DuckDuckGo. You guys are welcome to use whatever you please. It will not affect your experience that much. We're going to leave off stuff like this improve experiences. And basically anytime you see that, you're probably going to want to leave that off for most people. That is basically taking, share search query data. So whatever you search in that URL bar, and I didn't show really, but we showed with the URL bar, but you can do the exact same thing with this lower one. Whatever you type in one of those can be sent to Firefox's organization for them to see what you searched and what it pulled up. So some people might value their privacy more, and they're going to want to leave that off. Personally, I would do the same. Down in here is where you can add and modify search shortcuts. We're not really going to get into that right now because that's a little more advanced stuff. As you can see, this is using keywords and characters. We're just going to ignore that for right now. So if we continue down the menu here, we're going to look down here at privacy and security. I think we're going to end up skipping through most of this because most of these are a little more secure. They're a little more, you have to kind of know what you're messing with in here. You won't really break anything, but you could potentially, if selecting the wrong thing, put your system in risk of downloading something or not checking something when it goes on a web page. A lot of the stuff is already set up as it needs to be, like blocking pop-ups and things, preventing what data is being sent, and like blocking dangerous downloads and stuff. So we're going to ignore most of this. Feel free to look through it, but I wouldn't recommend changing anything unless you specifically have an issue and look online and someone tells you to. Even then, you should probably do your own research on get a second opinion kind of thing. What we are going to trigger is we're going to select both of these here. We're going to select send to websites that do not track requests, and we're going to tell websites not to sell or share my data. There's tons of arguments whether or not these actually do anything. Technically, these checkboxes do something, but whether or not what that message sends to websites, whether that website does something or not, is impossible to say. This is just a nice little, this is like a second attempt at doing something, but there's no way of knowing if these actually function on most sites that you're going to visit. But for the most part, those are fine. I wouldn't recommend messing with these too much. These are basically like what blocks different cookies and tracking information on certain sites. You can select the strict menu here, and I personally had experiences where, particularly on educational sites, things like course listing and assignment listing sites, this strict tends to break things, especially when they try using cross-cookie or cross-site data to kind of keep you logged in. Maybe you have an organization that uses a central login, and when you log in once, it just kind of keeps you logged in on a bunch of different websites, even if they're technically different. The strict can break things like that. So I would recommend leaving that off if you don't know what you're doing. And the problem is it's very difficult to, it's not very difficult, but it's less than, or it's more than one click to turn off. Especially for one site, it's very difficult to go in and say, okay, well, just don't use strict for this one site. It may not display content. I'm just going to suggest not turning that on for right now. Finally, we're going to go down to the bottom of the page there, and we're going to click on extensions and themes. This is something that you can feel free to look around through. I use quite a few of these myself, mostly ad blockers and things, but this is going to be a bit more do your own research kind of thing and figure out what you actually need, because there are some extensions that can be potentially dangerous. The ones that are highly rated, probably not, but if you look for something like an ad blocker, for example, there can be dozens, if not hundreds of alternatives, and I only know of a few that are highly rated and are considered perfectly safe. Not to mention some of these extensions can cause issues on certain sites, so I'm just going to not go into utilizing extensions until maybe a later episode, because it can cause more issues than it's worth sometimes. And that's basically the same with most of these, where we're just kind of not going to bother with most of these extra settings and tweaks. So we've looked over all the settings of Firefox. We've kind of seen how to change how it functions. Like when you open a new tab, what do you see? When you close it and you reopen it, what happens? Some like the security behind, or not security per se, but the functionality behind history and how things are saved and how things are handled. But now we can look into things of how it looks other than dark mode, which we had a little bit of that earlier. If we look around, I mean, yeah, we've changed this page, which looks better now in some people's opinion, my opinion. But we also have this large bar up here full of links, which is fine for maybe some people. I personally want to move it to a different page. And we have these gaps around here. We have some icons up here. We don't really know what those do just yet. I want to look into customizing that specifically next. So this bar first that has these links and these folders, as we can see, this is called the bookmarks bar. And some of you might be familiar with this. This is basically where you save links and pages and things you want to refer back to. A lot of people typically have a folder for school and a folder for work. You can put things in folders, obviously. You have a folder for school and a folder for work. You can have a number of bookmarks you possibly need, and with 1 to 2 clicks you can go in and find whatever page you might need, and you can just, instead of having to remember a whole bunch of pages. Personally, I dislike having the bookmarks bar up at the top of the screen all the time like this, because I'm someone who dislikes clutter. I'm someone who dislikes having a ton of stuff on my screen, which is why I like desktop environments like Gnome, desktop environments like KDE, because there's just too much going on already, plus what I'm already trying to focus on. So I like to turn this bookmarks bar off. If you just simply give it a right click somewhere along this bar, not above it, but just along this bar, I would recommend, in the center, and you right click it, you can go to bookmarks toolbar, and you can turn on to never show, which I wouldn't recommend, and only show on new tab, which I actually would recommend. If you click on this, it'll disappear here because we're not technically on a new tab. Or if you remember in the settings, we could change the home page and startup window and the new tab page. The new tab page is the Firefox home page. If we go open a new tab now, the bookmark bar is back. And now if we were to, open a new tab, we can now open whatever bookmark we would want from this page, which is more realistically most of the time where we're going to be opening something anyway. I would prefer to have it this way, but if you like having your bookmarks bar visible all the time, that's perfectly fine. All you have to do is click up anywhere technically along, okay, not at the top, but anywhere on this white, and you can go back to bookmarks bar and put it back to always show. If you prefer that, that's perfectly fine. I'm going to personally turn it off. I'm going to leave it on only show on new tab, but if that's what you want, that's up to you. Everybody has a different workflow, and there's nothing wrong with that. We're going to explore the bookmarks bar a little bit later, but what I'm going to do next is, if you right click on any of these blank spots, I believe also on any of these, yes you can right click on any of these buttons as well. So anywhere on this, what we're going to call the second bar, and you go to customize toolbar. Now we can see a new menu, which gives us some lines and some things we can see. We can customize what buttons are where on this menu, and some people might not feel the need to do this at all. If you don't, you can ignore what I'm about to say, you can skip forward, that's fine. But for some people who do actually want to experiment around with seeing how things work and maybe improving their workflow, maybe shortcuts don't work for you very well. So things like zoom, I see zoom controls right here. You could put zoom controls up here on the left. You just click and drag like you would with anything else in this system. You can kind of move it around as if it was an icon in the apps menu we looked at last episode. And now you don't have to remember shortcuts to do things like open a new tab, refresh the page, zoom in and out. You can just click on the button at the top of the screen, and it kind of presents itself in a much more accessible way, because you can really customize how you feel things need to be laid out, and it's not limiting you either by putting too many things there that you might not need. So if we look over on the right here, Pocket is something I'm going to get into in a bit, but for right now I'm going to get rid of it, and I can just drag this away and hide it down here. Now I don't need Pocket. Pocket is a method, it's an application built into Firefox for saving things like articles, like news articles, listicles, and things like that you can refer back to, is the idea behind Pocket. I personally dislike it. I don't use it, so I usually hide it away. But maybe if you're not going to use it, like I don't, you don't have to have the button there. It's not a requirement of Firefox to have it. This is your account, which you can sign into Firefox, and we'll get into in a second. You can save bookmarks and history and themes and things. So when you sign in on another computer or on your phone, which you can also get Firefox on, all or most of that stuff will carry over alongside it. So the power here to customize how this window feels and how these toolbars feel is right in front of you. It's right here, and we can just do whatever we need to. Maybe we want edit controls up on the right over here, and we want it between this little gap. So we want a gap here for whatever reason. I can't think of a reason, but we have one there. And now I have cut, copy, and paste commands built right in. I don't have to remember the very typical Control C, X, C, and V to cut, copy, and paste respectively. They're just presented front and center. Full screen, new window, sidebar, new private window, clear history, print screen. All of these settings are right here. I don't think there's anything that is non-explained that you're going to want to know. If I look through some of these really quick, some things like sidebars and open file, repair text encoding, I don't think you're going to need to know about. But if I look at something like import bookmarks, I don't know why that would be a button on here per se. But things like new window, full screen, passwords would be kind of a useful one for some people because it's actually buried up in this hamburger menu on the top right. You can change the density of this, which I wouldn't want to do unless you're on a touchscreen laptop, which Fedora is compatible with, by the way. I should have mentioned that in the first episode. And what this will do is it'll make the buttons a little bigger and a little easier to select. As you can tell, everything gets a little bit larger. I'm just going to leave it on normal because I'm on desktop for this. We're going to ignore toolbars for now because you don't need to know what that does. And title bar, we're going to leave off. Basically, that's just a non-standard rounded corners title bar. I can turn it on for a second here. And it just gives a little bit more room so your tabs aren't at the top. It gives you more room to drag your window around. That's up to you. I personally leave it off because it doesn't look as nice. I'm going to get rid of these extra widgets that I added here because I personally don't need them. These are also blanks you can drag away and you can put away if you want your bar to kind of fill the screen more, or you can add them back. You can add more so it's narrower if you wanted that. Again, you can really customize this to exactly how you want it to feel and what you want it to do. So go crazy. Again, you won't break anything here. And I'm pretty sure if you get rid of something, oh, you can't actually get rid of those. You can move them, but you can't get rid of those. Okay, can you get rid of refresh page? You can. Okay, you can get rid of refresh page. You can get rid of the home button, which typically I don't use the home button, but most people are probably going to want to. I'm going to get through what some of these buttons at the top do. I'm going to put pocket back because I need to explain what that does for people who are going to want to use it. And I'm going to click done, which is now going to save that. And now, I mean, I haven't changed anything, but if you changed anything, then it will be laid out right here in front.